I'd like to introduce Kelly O'Shannessy. She's the CEO of the Australian Conservation Foundation and a sustainability leader, experienced in executive roles in business, government and the community sector. In her career, Kelly has led the charge to boost clean energy, make homes more energy and water efficient and make recycling cheaper and easier. She's written world-first water and marine protection policies and successfully stopped an environmentally destructive new coal plant being built in the Latrobe Valley. Well done. She has a track record of building people power to advocate for a better, safer environment and future. She's also respected for her work in helping business leaders advocate for a modern and sustainable economy, culminating in Kelly being recognised amongst the top 100 businesswomen in Australia in the 2013 Telstra Businesswomen's Awards. Please welcome to the stage Kelly O'Shannessy.
Hello everyone, I'm very excited to be here, mainly because they said I could talk about anything I like. You never say that to an environmentalist, but as long as it had something to do with education and sustainability, and so I will try and focus on that. But I also wanted to follow on from Christine later in my talk as well about the leadership challenge that we have and the hope that I have for the future and the opportunity for us all to step up. I actually wanted to start by telling a story about my mum, who came into the world as Mary Catherine Gleeson. I'm actually not sure when. Daughters are terrible, but I think it was around 1948. And she quickly became a Marie, because there's too many Marys in the family. And she has got an enormous heart, my mum. It's hidden to most people. To get to the depths of my mum's heart is an effort. But the kids and the family and my dad have all got there, of course. And there's another special group of people who got there, and that was mum's students, because my mother was a teacher. She was a primary school teacher. And she taught we're from Victoria, and she taught in one of the poorer suburbs in Victoria called Norlane, at the Norlane Public School. And there was only one suburb in Geelong where we lived, and in Victoria that was poorer, and that was Corio where we lived. And we lived in the public housing there. And I remember when I was about 8 years old, my mum coming home and saying it was a really hard day for her, and she said, "Kelly, I think I just care too much. If I was a teacher who didn't care as much, I'd be able to cope more easily with this job." And so she was having a very hard day. But that night, some of the local parents came around and said, "Can you help tutor our kids? They need your help. We can't afford a tutor. Can you help?" So my mum, having the worst day, said yes. And she used to do that all of the time. And it really taught me, when I was 8 years old, about doing things for the greater good, being part of a bigger team than you can be on your own. And teachers do that. Teachers are part of something bigger than themselves. Politicians, or most of them, are part of being something bigger than themselves. And that really inspired me to go on to do what I do, which is to become an advocate, because that is, of course, also being part of something that's bigger than yourself. And I had to reflect on that last year when we had to make a speech for the Telstra Awards, which was highly embarrassing. And you had to think about your story of self, and I really came back to thinking about my mum and my dad, because he was a policeman and he used to also get caught out every weekend to help people who got in trouble with the law. So it's a wonderful thing to be an advocate, to be a teacher, and to build a better future. That's, of course, what we do at the Australian Conservation Foundation. Most of you will know who we are and the organisation. We are a national environment group, one of the most influential. We're 50 years old. We actually started from the conservative movement. And then around the time of the Franklin, ACF became a little bit more bolder and started joining with community and leading the community charge. And so now we're an organisation who prods and cajoles and lobbies our politicians, who innovates and creates solutions and policies that will create a better future. We mobilise communities to help them take their own action at home and to help them take bigger action on behalf of the community. And we also catalyse unusual suspects. So we work a lot with business, and we're working more and more with different sectors because we can't do this on our own, and we're all affected, of course, by nature and by climate change, and therefore we're all part of moving forward and all part of the solution. What you may not know about ACF is that we have formed an alliance with many, many groups, including ACTS, called the Australian Education for Sustainability Alliance. And that alliance includes, as I said, a range of organisations, including teacher and tertiary unions, parent and environmental organisations, and has a vision to create a more sustainable Australia by ensuring all Australians have the opportunity to learn the skills, practices and values of sustainability through formal education systems. It's really taking a leading role in not incorporating sustainability into the curriculum, because that has been done, but making sure that we actually are teaching that, delivering on that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about where that's at the moment. But I just wanted to start with some thoughts, not being a teacher, by the way, so please, any thoughts I have on how we can build sustainability into education, I think you're the experts, you know more than me. I know a fair bit about sustainability and where we're at, and so I will focus on that area. And I note that recently I watched a video from David Suzuki, one of the premier environmental and sustainability educators in the world, and he really laments that in his work he has not focused as much on education as he could have through the Suzuki Foundation and through his career. And he would think that students that are starting primary school now will be in school to 2026, and some of them will live to see the 22nd century. And often in our movement, it's what we call the environment. I don't know why we call it a movement, but we do. All the environment groups coming together. We get so focused on the issue of the day, and we forget about the systemic issues that are critical to actually driving change. And ACF has noticed that several years ago, and is trying to move away from being captured by the shenanigans of the day, and often they are shenanigans, to actually setting our own destiny and our own vision for this country and delivering on that. And education is going to be key to that. So these kids, cute little preppies, are going to be our future, and they're going to have to deal with the problems that we are passing on to them, that our generation is passing on to them. And the way I think about it, ACF has a motto, change today for a better tomorrow, a sustainable tomorrow. I try not to use the word sustainable too often. In talking to our kids and educating our kids is how you do that, because they are tomorrow. And by working with them today, that is the best way that we can create a better tomorrow. These little tackers are going to face a very different world to the one that I faced when I trotted off to school, 6 years old. My mum actually was my teacher, which is a weird thing, but she was very good at it. But these kids are going to face a very different world, much bigger population than we have now, fewer resources, because we're using many, many more resources than nature can replenish at any given time, and a much more dangerous climate than we grew up with. And we're starting to see that danger now. There's been about 1 degree or a little under 1 degree of warming across the globe, and arguably it is already dangerous to go bushwalking in summer. On a really hot day, you have to think, do I do that? Some people have to leave their homes in summer if they live near a fire-prone area. My mother and father still live. They moved out of Cryo and moved into the bush, and they still have to evacuate on really hot days, and they take the horses and the dog and they get out of there because it's too dangerous. That's not a safe world, and that's with 1 degree of warming. The speed of change that these kids are going to have to deal with is going to be greater than ever before in human history. Technological changes, behavioural changes, ecological changes, economical changes, sociological changes will be very, very fast. And their biggest challenge is really going to be, as I said before, repairing the damage that we have done. We are trying really hard to limit that damage and to rebuild our natural capital, but we have had an impact on the globe, and the next generation's role is going to be to fix that. I wanted to talk then about how how we can educate people around sustainability to make that happen. I'm going to do a little bit of a head talk and then a bit of a heart talk. The head stuff is all about embedding sustainability in the education sector. And it's critical because it has the ability to transform this country if we do that. We did some work in the Education for Sustainability Alliance, and we did a survey and surveyed 5,000 teachers. 92% of those teachers think that education for sustainability is very important to teach, critically important to teach, but only 80% of them don't know enough or are not comfortable enough to actually teach it. So it's actually not happening. There are a range of recommendations made in the report that can be found on the Alliance's website, which I can give to you later. 3 key ones are accessible classroom-ready resource materials for teaching sustainability, make it simple, professional development and support networks for teachers, and this is a really important support network. And this is actually not in the report, I've just made it up as I've gone along, but unless we actually require people to do these things, they won't do them. So that needs to be in people's KPIs to actually teach the curriculum and the parts of the curriculum around sustainability. So that's the head stuff. But for me, I'm going to talk a little bit about sustainability now. The biggest thing that we need to teach, whether it's little tackers who are just starting, all the way through up to tertiary, we need to teach ambition. We're not teaching ambition around sustainability. In fact, what we have to do is add words on, like holistic, to sustainability. Sustainability is holistic, but we have to add those words on because that word has been hijacked from 1992 when it came out of the Rio Convention. It has been hijacked to be eco-efficiency and ecological sustainable development and green growth and many other things, but what it actually is a central thing to what we do. So if you're a business and your business plan and your sustainability plan are different things, then you're not sustainable. If you're a school and your sustainability work is different and is not included in your curriculum, which is what you do, then you're not sustainable. So I very much agree that how universities, for example, invest is critically important. What I see a lot is businesses changing the light bulbs and not worrying about their core business. So an energy company has energy efficient light bulbs and is producing energy from coal and is trying to say that they are sustainable. That's not sustainable. So we need to teach ambition. And I wanted to read a bit from my favourite book. Most people have favourite novels. Mine is a book called Cradle to Cradle, and it's about remaking the way we make things. And this book is actually not made on paper. No tree was harmed in the making of this book. It's made on 100% recyclable polymer, non-toxic. The ink can be lifted completely. And the authors were trying to say how you could make things that's still a book, but differently, more sustainably. It's not perfect because it's pretty heavy. It is excellent to read in the bath though, because you can't get it wet. But what they talk about, I don't read this in the bath. To make that point about sustainability, they're talking about designing a system of production and consumption, otherwise known as the economy. So this is our current system. Puts billions of pounds of toxic material into the air, water and soil every year. Produces some materials so dangerous they require constant vigilance by future generations. Results in gigantic amounts of waste. Puts valuable materials in holes all over the planet where they can never be retrieved. Requires thousands of complex regulations, not to keep people safe, but to keep them from being poisoned too quickly. Measures productivity by how few people are working. Creates prosperity by digging up or cutting down natural resources and then burying them or burning them. And erodes the diversity of species and cultural practices. So what we have been teaching on sustainability, I don't think this is happening now, but what we have been teaching and what we've been hearing from many of the big businesses, from our political leaders, would design a system like this. Release fewer pounds of toxic waste into the air, soil and water every year. Measure prosperity by less activity. Meet the stipulations of thousands of complex regulations to keep people and natural systems from being poisoned too quickly. produce fewer materials that are so dangerous that they require future generations to maintain constant vigilance, result in smaller amounts of useless waste, and put smaller amounts of valuable materials in holes all over the planet so they can never be retrieved. So we're trying to do things a little less bad, and we need to do things 100% good. That needs to be our goal. That needs to be what we teach. Now, this is idealistic. Obviously, it's coming from me, and that's what I specialise in. But it's also completely possible. And there are many, many examples. And as Nelson Mandela says, it always seems impossible until we actually do it. What we need to be teaching our children, and this is their challenge for the future, is to design buildings that, like trees, produce more energy than they consume and purify with their own wastewater. Factories that produce effluents for drinking, done in Germany, by the way. Products that at the end of their useful life do not become waste, but can be and are not tossed into the ground, but become food for plants and animals and nutrients, soil, or alternatively, are upcycled, they call it here, and reused into something useful. And where billions, even trillions of dollars worth of materials accrued for human and natural purposes each year are recycled into our system. It's called the circular economy. It's very big everywhere other than Australia. These are the things we need to be teaching. And it goes on and on to talk about what type of future do we want to have. That's what we need to teach. So I want us to teach ambition to our kids, to be a little less bad, not to focus on things like eco-efficiency and other things, but how do we actually redesign systems to be 100% good? That's the hard stuff. I wanted to talk about leadership and hope for the future and really focus on resilience for a while. Resilience is actually quite critical to sustainability, as many of you would know, but also quite critical to you and to me and Christine in our jobs. They are hard jobs. And we need to acknowledge that this is a very, very difficult time. I've been in my role for 6 months, and when the job was offered to me, I thought, do I really want to take this very crucial role when the current government is in place at the federal level and at the state levels, who are all working furiously to take our environment backwards, to remove sustainability from the curriculum, to undo climate protection laws, to delist World Heritage areas, which we would be the first developed country in the world to do. So we are groundbreaking in some ways. At ACF, I decided yes, because my future and the future of ACF and our strategy doesn't depend on who is in government, because it depends on us, it depends on you. In the absence of leadership from our governments, and it doesn't matter where they've come from, it's not just the current government, previous governments with different political colours have been unable to deliver the types of changes necessary. So it is up to us and up to the community to lead. So we really need to get out there and build leadership in communities. Now that starts at the tertiary level, in fact. It starts younger than that because you build your leadership capability when you're quite young, but the Australian Youth Climate Coalition is a fantastic example of an organisation that's building that leadership and then letting those leaders out into the world, building their capacity and creating change when our governments are refusing to change. Dr. Luther King says our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter. And like Christine, I would like to acknowledge that you are not silent. Neither am I. This is the most important time in human history for the future of ourselves and our kids and our planet. I love nature. I brought up on the farm after we moved out of Corio, and I love nature more than anything except for people that I love. I love them more, and that's why I do this job. I will speak up for their future, and their future is in peril at this point in time. So we are unable to be silent. We need to keep going with our jobs. It's well-known fact that not all heroes have capes and wear underpants on the outside. Some of them are teachers, some of them are politicians, and some of them are advocates. We need to stick together because it is going to be difficult. And as you teach these things, and when I joined the environment movement 7.5 years ago, I knew a lot about climate change before then, written policies about it in government and built it into our water planning, but when I read the stuff that's the latest science that's not in the IPCC reports, because it's newer than that, I walked out of my office every 5 minutes going, oh my God, oh my God. And then I'd go back and read and go, oh my God. And then you just figure out a way forward, you figure out what you're going to do about it, because you can let things overwhelm you. But what we need to change those swirling emotions in is to hope and courage. And I've got this nice saying, I think I got it from West Wing, actually, writers, which is that fear paralyses and hope inspires. And so I use that just to keep myself going and to inspire myself, but also in our communications, in the way that we teach people, the way that we educate people. Nothing is set. The future is what we make it, what we decide it to be. Nothing is set. And I've got to tell you that the power of the people is much, much greater than the people in power. I've known a lot of them, they're great people, but once they're not elected, they just become a regular person like us. Our power is great when you work in the marginal areas, as Christine was saying earlier. If you can really build that power in communities, we can actually change the future. We've got to focus on the solutions, not the problems. That's part of the positivity. And like Christine, I agree that we are that small group of people. There are many, many of you, not just in the teaching and education area, but in the health sector and in the emergency response sector, and doctors and nurses, and my mum and my dad, that are all there with you, working as hard. So I wanted to end with a story about a tree that was not harmed in the making of this book and is still standing. And this is a story about resilience. This tree is a beautiful eucalypt that lives in the Florentine Valley in Tasmania. And the Florentine Valley was included as a World Heritage listed area in 2013. After many, many years of struggle, I wanted to tell you about that struggle, but first I'll let you know that this valley was one of the valleys that the federal government wanted to delist from World Heritage listing very recently. I'm very proud to say that the United Nations body that looks at this took 7 minutes to consider that that was a really silly idea, and that these trees are worth a lot more when they're standing than they are when they are cut down. And so they are now protected. But I wanted to tell you the story of how they became protected in the first place. When the government wanted to delist this area, and in my first month at ACF, I said, can you take me down to see these trees? And the fellow that took us around, his name was Ed, he told me a story about the 6 years leading up to before the World Heritage protection was put in place, and the blockades that these amazing people, these heroes as far as I can see, undertook to stand in between the loggers and these trees in this valley. They'd set up their blockades and they'd protect the trees, and then the police and others would come in and undo the blockades, and they'd sneak back in overnight and rebuild them. This happened for about 5 years and 12 months. And while that was happening, it gave time for political parties and for environmental groups to get into politics and advocate for the protection of these areas, while these very brave people were out in the freezing cold, stuck up in a tree, hanging off a rope. One time, about nearly 6 years in to the blockade, 6 years spending in this forest, the clearing out of the blockade was very, very successful, and all of their equipment was taken. And there was fear that they were not able to rebuild the blockade overnight. And that night, a really old tree, 600 years old like this one, fell over across the track. And that tree still stands. It's still there. You have to climb over that tree to walk down to the Florentine Valley, because about a week later, the government of the day decided to nominate that area for World Heritage listing, and the blockade could be lifted. So nature's pretty smart, blockade herself, but it's these wonderful people who were so resilient that every time someone said no to them, they just kept asking and they stayed until they got a yes. And what we are reminded by for that is that after the very last no comes a yes, and that yes can change the world. So I implore you to keep asking. I'll keep asking, keep teaching, because the yes is just around the corner. Thank you.